And I think the only way that you get there is if you are already investing in figuring out how you can use AI in the existing business. You're upskilling the team to do that, and then potentially you can unlock some new opportunities as well. So that's...
You're listening to the Accounting Disruptors podcast powered by the WIS Lab. I'm Paul Peterson, CEO of WIS. This show is about the people transforming accounting, the founders building the technology and discovering what becomes possible with deployed intelligence and automation. Welcome back. Last time, Matt Harpe from Basis painted a compelling vision of AI's transformative potential and how accounting will be shaped in the future. Today, we're going to get a little bit more tactical and talk about how are firms actually going to make this happen. How is AI going to impact me in terms of my day-to-day, and is it going to replace me? And what is that role of an accountant look like? So it's, yes, what does the firm look like, but what does the role of an accountant look like as well as this evolves over the next few years?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yeah, on the topic of agents, just in terms of how to think about that.
Yeah.
You know, as a company, actually, when we started 3 years ago, had a premise that the main thing we wanted to focus on building were these agentic systems, building agents. And why did we think that was important at the time? The viewpoint then was, if you actually want to get the benefits, the supposed benefits of AI, at least as we've kind of articulated it, you need AI that can actually do things. And can work through complex problems. And so when we think about agents, we really just think about an AI that has the agency to decide what it's going to do. And so I think that, you know, so much of the focus over the last couple years has been on the chat experience. You know, the idea that you can chat with a computer is absolutely fantastic. The idea that you can talk to a computer is magical. And extremely useful in many ways, but that alone doesn't get you to the point where you can actually, get the supposed benefits of AI in terms of making things automated, in terms of making things more efficient. And so, in our view, having agents that can actually take on work has always been the fundamental thing you need to work on. Now, let's say that is the thing that you're working towards, and that's the thing that you want to empower every accountant with. How does that change the role of the accountant? I think it does, it means that one accountant can do way more than they could previously.
For sure, right? And so the capacity of this individual
changes dramatically.
Increases,
and it also probably means that there is a real skill set to be built in knowing how to work with AIs, just like there's a skill set that people spend years developing around how to work with other people. You can argue like
I never thought of it
start
that
with
way.
Kindergarten. And,
it's so true. I've really never have thought about it that way.
And then you want to become a manager or you want to lead a team, and that's again about learning how to work with people. And so maybe we think that there's a similar skill set to be built around how to work with the AI, how to work with the agents, and how to get really good at managing those agents. And so I think there will be huge career development for folks who really take that head on and embrace that and figure out, how to get really good at that skill. And, I think everyone is still in the early phases of being good at that. But I think in the coming years, it'll just be hugely, hugely important.
Yeah. So how does a firm embrace that, right? Like when you think about it, how do you start training them now so that they do become more comfortable with the tools that are going to be more readily available in shaping, I think, an accountant to be successful later? Like any tips there?
Yeah, I think so I think maybe a couple ideas.
Yeah,
I think the first is you need really good AI and you need good agents, and I think a lot of people have been colored by experiences they've had with certain softwares that are just not capable and accurate enough to deliver results. And it's just like, imagine you're working with a person and that person can just never really do exactly what you need. And it's wrong, even 10% of the time, let alone 50% of the time, you kind of get a little bit disenchanted with that prospect. So the first thing is you need to invest in having the best AI, because if you don't, you're going to be building all these assumptions in your mind about what it can and can't do that maybe don't actually extrapolate to what will exist in the future or even what exists today.
That's right.
I think the second thing is you need, I believe that as a firm, you need to have kind of top-down, belief and communication that this is important and this is where things are going.
Yeah.
People are feeling a lot of uncertainty right now about what's going to happen in, AI as it pertains to accounting firms and the broader, just the world in general. I think there's a lot of uncertainty in many ways. And so people are looking for leadership on that topic around how they should or should not embrace these types of things. And there is, if you want to get there, I think there's a lot that you can get with minimal investment of just there's, low-hanging fruit where the AI can take on all these things and that's super valuable. But to really get to the place that we want to be with the firm of the future, there is some investment of time that's required to train people and educate people around how these things work and how they can use them and whatnot. And I think unless there is a viewpoint from the people that folks look up to in the firm and the people who make strategic decisions that, hey, this is extremely important. This is important for your career and it's important for the future of our firm. People are less likely to take time out of their day to really invest in getting
Agreed.
better. And so I think that's important. And then the final thing that's probably important is just, I think the organic element is great, but you need some kind of structured direction around what are the tangible benefits we can get from the AI right now.
Yep.
And so having a list of priorities, like here's what we're going to try to do, is super valuable. And whenever we start working with firms, that's the first thing we try to just identify is to say, hey, you're not going to be able to do everything on day one. Let's just agree on, here's all the things that we think you should do. It's over to you to decide how you execute that and how you roll this out. But why don't we start with a set of things that you think is most important so that people have some degree of focus. Obviously, there's so many, there's this huge universe of things that you can do, and you need to boil it down in some kind of more manageable way.
I like that. And so maybe you could just say like, hey, here's what I think a firm of the future will look like. And then we work a little bit in reverse just in terms of how does a firm get there? And you've seen a lot of different firms. And there are firms that are still very manual.
Yep.
Right? So it's very interesting how little innovation has really taken place in accounting. Yes, there's softwares. We have always dumped information to Excel. We can manipulate it, analyze it. That's become like the main artifact outside of systems, of record that you can hopefully gain meaningful information out of. Many times you're still limited there, right? So I think you've seen A to Z, all types of firms. So what do you see like, hey, an optimal firm looks like this down the road, and also how does a firm get there?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it we know and some of it we don't know.
Yeah.
It's TBD, but I think so. It's interesting because the point on why has there not been faster adoption of technology to date?
That's a great piece.
Yeah,
right
is an aspect of
yeah.
it, I think.
Yeah,
because people do have this perception that and I think a lot of people feel this about the industry, but people have this perception that accounting hasn't changed, it hasn't kept up with technology and things like this. And I think there's an element to which that's true.
Yep.
Certainly things have changed. Lots of people will give you anecdotes about how they used to work on pen and paper, or they would go to the client site with a
the 12 columns,
would wheel in exactly
get.
And so of course we've come a long way over a period of time, but maybe we haven't moved. Maybe we haven't moved at the pace that people have moved in the sort of consumer technology they're used to. What's the equivalent of like hailing an Uber for accounting? Maybe it's not totally clear whether those benefits have been fully realized.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is a lot of the change that's happened to date has been relatively incremental. It's just like small improvements on the previous things.
Very incremental.
And so this is different in a big way in that it potentially wholly transformed the way people do work. So that's one aspect of it. I think the other kind of interesting aspect is who do the benefits accrue to of the technology?
Yeah.
And I think if you just look at so much of the technology that firms have rolled out or tried to roll out over the last 10 years, it's about, as firms scale, how do we standardize and centralize and maybe make things a little bit more efficient? but oftentimes you're imposing a structure on someone because that's the only way to grow the firm.
That's right.
And there's not necessarily that much benefit to the individual accountant.
Yeah.
And that sort of creates a scenario where you have to build a big transformation team and figure out how do we force people to do essentially this so that we can operate as a firm. I think one of the exciting things about AI and what's now possible is hopefully there are tremendous benefits to the day-to-day work that people go about. All the manual rote things that people get tired of doing that causes burnout during busy season and it causes people to churn out of the profession.
Yeah.
We should be able to automate that.
I agree.
And that should be really exciting for people because it can change the day-to-day for them in a really meaningful way. And so potentially, potentially one thing that will help adoption a lot and maybe will accelerate things significantly is it's no longer incremental change, it's very dramatic change. And so that should make things move faster. But second of all, if every person feels the benefit of making the change, then potentially it's a lot easier to roll out and there's a lot less effort that needs to go into or challenge that goes into just adding very simple things to the process. Now, all that said, you still need a firm that wants to do this and has the right mindset. And we kind of have identified a couple different mindsets in firms that
talk about
we see
that a
at
little
play.
bit. Yeah, I like that.
But at least I think those first two things help a bit.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, one of the things that you touched on, I'm really happy about that, is the role of the individual accountant. It's stressful. It really is, right? And a lot of talk is around, these periods of time where there's so much compression and so little time to actually think, right? And to add value to the client. And a lot of times as an individual accountant, I would say some of the worst days I've had in accounting is when I've let down the client, right? And I've let down the client because the tools really didn't help me get better at what I'm doing. Yes, maybe it helped me in terms of organizing information better, presenting the information better, giving me the ability to do it differently, right? Okay, that saves time. But it hasn't really made me a better accountant, right? So I think in terms of just when I think of my baseline as an accountant, I would say that I've really never had a lot of help from the systems. Like even today, when you think about tax software and you have a return done for you, it's product oriented. Like at the end of the day, I'm delivering a product. It's like it helped produce the end product, but it really hasn't made me better in terms of how I now consult with the client based on this product.
Yep.
And so this missing intelligence is for real. And because of the missing intelligence, that's what's led to a lot of burnout at the same time, is because you never feel like you're adding enough value or you're letting people down. Because even when you get compressed, you're letting your boss down, and that's stressful. Or if you are the boss and you now have the relationship with the client, you feel like you let the client down. And that's where a lot of stress has come from.
Yes.
In the experience of these roller coaster of emotions. We always say it's like, you have a great day in accounting and you're kind of just waiting for the next bad day to offset the good,
Yeah, it's totally true. I think it's interesting just to observe when you end up in that crunch situation. What do people do? They just whip out Excel and they say, let me just do this myself because that's my only chance of getting this done. That is probably a sign that the software that exists is not as good as it could be.
No.
Because that's not the reaction that you probably want in that type of situation. So yes, I think that's totally the case, and hopefully that will help a lot. Now on the mindset piece, it's interesting as well because I do think that we kind of break it down. We've observed three mindsets, and this I'm curious what you think about this. But the first is that there are firms that we say take a defensive mindset, and the mindset there is just a lot is going to change. What can I do to keep up?
Yep.
How do I make sure I mitigate the risk? That this change and uncertainty might create, and maybe the course of action there is just to say, let me go buy IBM or whatever the equivalent is of AI for IBM. I won't, no one gets fired for doing that, and so you buy the sort of incremental AI thing that maybe helps a little bit, but is really missing the full potential. And of course, the challenge there is that if we think that a big part of this is how do you upskill the entire firm and every accountant in the firm, then you never get to even having the technology that will allow you to do that, nevertheless investing and making that more possible. The second mindset is, we call it the private equity mindset. And it has nothing to do with whether the firm actually has private equity ownership or not.
Sure.
But it's just the mindset of, okay, great, we can make things more efficient.
Yep.
And what does that mean for the general margin profile of the business, or the general, financials of the firm? Maybe there's an opportunity to improve that. And I think that certainly should be true. If the promise of AI actually delivers. And so maybe in that situation, it is worth investing and, starting to realize some of those benefits and upskilling the team, because the only way that you'll be able to do that is if you really fully embrace what's possible.
Right.
And then the third mindset, which I think is rare but is quite interesting, we call it the venture capital mindset. And it's, in order to realize the venture capital mindset, of course, part of what you're thinking about is there's a huge opportunity with our existing business to make things much more efficient, to help improve the quality of life for accountants, all the things that we've been talking about. But there's also an interesting aspect, which maybe we can get into later, about how does this actually change the way we can position in the market?
Yep.
And what new opportunities does this unlock? And I think that there is a pretty substantial opportunity right now,
it's huge,
as things are changing, to do some interesting things. And I think the only way that you get there is if you are already investing in figuring out how you can use AI in the existing business. You're upskilling the team to do that, and then potentially you can unlock some new opportunities as well. So that's kind of how we see it when we're looking at mindsets. And we're happy to work with firms of all shapes and sizes that come with different mindsets. But I do think that what that mindset is affects the way that every accountant in the firm operates.
Yeah, and maybe we could do this too, like speak a little bit about how Basis sees their customer, right? I mean, there's 3 million accountants, tons of accountants. There are public accounting firms, and there's private companies, of course, publicly traded companies, the like, right? So there are many ways to go and say, hey, our mission is, let's just say one of our missions is to improve the life of an accountant. How do you see that playing out? And who are your main customers now that you feel this is the approach that we feel we could be most successful at Basis?
Yeah, so we've had a kind of view from the early days that we've continued to believe strongly in, which is that we currently only serve accounting firms, and we actually only serve large accounting firms at the moment, more firms over time. We're in a pretty substantial proportion of the top 100 firms in the country. And our view there is that every business in America will need to figure out, will probably want to figure out how AI can impact the way that they operate.
Right.
I think to us it's pretty clear that that the way that accounting is done will change and is changing pretty dramatically. And if you compare what existed a year or two ago with what will, with the way that processes will work in the most sophisticated places in a year or two's time, it will be, significantly different. I think it already is at a firm like WIS. And so if that is the case, which I think you and I both agree, then there needs to be some way of getting all those companies from where they are today to the sort of AI future of accounting and the broader AI future of corporate finance. And the thing that's, the way that we look at it is, well, of course, there's a huge opportunity to help the firms that we work with directly impact the way that they go about providing services to customers. We can hopefully, build, essentially buy people more and more time to spend on the advisory elements. And, the example you gave earlier on taxes is a great one. But then also, hopefully, we can also enable those firms to work closely with their clients to figure out how those clients can also improve, the way that they go about their accounting. And I think that, if we were just to look at that as a company ourselves, there are tens of millions of businesses in the U.S. and individuals as well. They all need to figure out how to cross that chasm, or they all would benefit substantially. And pretty much every one of them has a relationship with an accounting firm.
Yep.
And so our view is that as accountants in the leading firms become expert at deploying AI and deploying basis in their context, there's a huge opportunity to then work closely with their clients to essentially be their AI guide through their accounting journey. And I think more and more companies are starting to ask about that and want to know from their firms, what is the plan here? How do you see this playing out, and what should we be doing as a company?
I love that, and I think it's so crucial, right? That we, as the CPAs, the public accountants, the firms that really are representing clients, that we almost take that on as our obligation, because this last mile, let's say, right, of bringing AI, it's really hard. I mean, it's I think one of the things that we have heard constantly is the shortage of accountants, right? 17% of all CPAs left the profession shortly after COVID or during that COVID period. There's not enough accountants coming in to, offset that gap. So clearly there's a lot of pressure even on a lot of accountants today in private or in public, where they're having just a hard enough time doing the basics, right? And so I think you have to think about, how does even someone have the time to spend to go and investigate all these emerging technologies? Of course, they're hearing about AI. That's a lot different. How do you bring AI in? And where do you bring AI in? And so I think the public accountants have a necessary part in doing this. And I'm hoping it advances quicker than perhaps it is already. I equate it to, it's very interesting because, like, when you had COVID, all of a sudden it demonstrated you can do your work differently, right? You could have, but you needed almost like an inflection point. And unfortunately, that's been true a lot in accounting. And I think it has been why we've seen incremental innovation, is just there's a tendency for a me too, like, hey, what are you doing? Oh, I'll do that too. And there hasn't been, let's say, a lot of pioneering in accounting. Now, granted, a lot of that maybe has been held back by technology and the tools available to do that, and how do you disrupt accounting, but clearly it's here now, right? So I think it's really important for a firm to ask itself, what role does it really play with its clients? And yes, you're doing these traditional services and you're offering advisory services, all that, but how can you improve the life of the accountant there too? I think it goes hand in hand.
Yes.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. How do you see that playing out in terms of firms and their clients and how they partner?
Yeah, we have to. I mean, we've really tried to create space here. I'm very fortunate here at WIS, and I have colleagues that are very supportive of the investments that are needed, right? Because we're not PE backed, so this comes out of the pockets.
Yeah.
And I'm greatly appreciative of that. And also, we've had great colleagues that we're working with that are trying to solve these problems on our behalf too. So, and at the same time, keeping the business running, right? So that you don't want to distract from doing what has to be done, but at the same time, opening up space so you can run experiments.
Yep.
You need to run some pilots. You need to really think about entry points into where can you bring in AI, and we've really just made it a necessary part for us. Like it's now in our DNA to make sure that we're right at that intersection where if AI can do X, we got to at least experiment and see what it can do and continue to iterate. So I feel very good that we saw this as like a North Star type of a thing, and we keep moving in that direction.
I think it's been interesting to see too how with the, you start by saying, how do we use AI for all the things internally that would be helpful for the business, for the way that we provide services to customers.
Yeah.
And then over time, as people build a fluency with it and start to themselves recognize the potential, it feels to me like that's created an environment where people are starting to think outside the box in terms of ways that we can serve clients better.
That's right.
I think that foundation has been, the investment you all made in that foundation really early on has played out in a very interesting way in terms of what you all are thinking about and ideating around. And to see the whole firm doing that, and many people weighing in on that is really
I
interesting.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, you guys have helped tremendously, and that's interesting because I think we're kind of hitting on like what could be the impediment, right? Like, what do you see as your biggest competition? Because it's really not competitors, let's say right now, right? I mean, you guys are so advanced, you started early, but what do you see as the impediment for holding Basis back and fulfilling its mission, and even on the timeline of your mission?
Yeah, I think I think about it in two ways. There's kind of the product and AI aspect of things.
Yep.
And there is the firm partnership and adoption part of things. I think on the product and AI side, I think there are the biggest thing for us that we're just relentlessly focused on is how do you get people to trust the AIs that they're working with. If you want to empower every accountant with a team of agents that can go out and do work for them, they need to have a relationship with those agents, a trust with those agents that they know if they do X, they're going to get back Y, and they can build up a mental model for that and understanding of that. And so that's why we are just so maniacally focused on the performance, the accuracy, the predictability of the AI. I think until that's in place, it's really difficult to make much progress beyond it because you're just dealing with this black box of randomness. And so I think from a product perspective, just continuing to allow accountants to build that trust over different domains, it's super important. And it's a challenge with AI, of course. And then I think from a firm partnership and adoption perspective, in my mind, the number one thing just comes back to the mindset and what firms want to do. And there is a status quo bias where people just say, this is how I've done it and it's good enough. And I totally understand that. When you're, as you were mentioning earlier, when you're in the day-to-day of the job, you don't really want to pull back and think about how might we do this differently. I think every person experiences that in the way they go about doing things. But I think there are huge benefits to be had from changing it. And so I think, that's something that we've seen evolve over the course of the last couple of years. There weren't many firms like, that were thinking that way 3 years ago. WIS was a rare exception. I think people are starting to understand there's a lot of potential here, but it still is pervasive. And I think it probably will continue, and not every firm will.
I know,
come
which
around.
is unfortunate, really. But I agree with you. I feel like the friction is mindset, right? Like what we talked about earlier. And also just, I think this whole concept of Sally, right? Like we have this acronym in accounting. It's like same as last year, right? And it's held us back even on our own sort of procedures that we'd like to. We've said to people every year, like, hey, outside of busy season, think about how you do the job differently. And that really doesn't happen. So, in some cases it does, but again, it's limited. And I think that my recommendation, for those that are embarking on this journey is you just have to, like you said, it has to be top down. It has to be, this is what we're doing. And yes, we're going to, there is going to be trial and error, and there's going to be some failure, and you just got to keep doing it and doing it and doing it, and that commitment. Because you're going to run into people that are not embracing it fully, but over time they will. I mean, that's the thing. What you nailed, and that's what I want our listeners to hear, is that as the trust builds, because your agents work, Basis works, you start to get people adopting in that you never thought you would. And that was like a big awakening for us, is that we had a few people that we thought would be big resistors. And now that they're like raving fans of the tools, it speaks volumes about what you talked about. Like they have to have that trust and confidence that these will actually work, but it works. And I think that's the biggest thing that has to get out there more into the marketplace, is that it's moved beyond concept, right? Like, yes, it still has a ways to go, and it will get there quicker probably than many people think, right? But it works now. And so it's almost, can you find where it works in your organization and build the trust based on where it works today, instead of thinking so grandiose around it and having maybe too large of what you want to accomplish, like you talked about before, right? It's just like, where can you use it today to make it work so you can build the trust?
Yeah.
Because I think that's where we have to overcome in many cases for firms to be more, I think, embracing of it, is that, it's going to work if you do it.
Yep. I think it's interesting too, because there is this weird element where, in some sense, what people discuss or put forth is so grandiose.
Yes.
We're using AI for every single
Yes.
thing. And then the reality, often, if you talk to individual accountants at firms, is, that don't yet have a cohesive strategy or have not figured out the right way to go about it, is like, I've seen it. It seems interesting, but I'm not really using it.
Right.
And there is a huge disconnect, I think, between those two things. Everyone needs to be seen like they are doing all this AI.
Yep.
And understandably, like, people appreciate that it's the important thing to do right now. But there is a bit of a disconnect between those two things. And so I think a great question just to ask is like, okay, can we actually point to anything in the firm where it has made a meaningful difference
Totally.
in the way people go about things? And I think a lot of people probably, would have difficulty doing that yet. And I think you just got to get those things really going, so that then you can go to the next level.
You have to. And I think, again, what everyone has to understand is that each organization has its own way of doing things, right? So they have their own process, their own procedures. A lot of these things are not written down. It's in people's minds. It's in the culture, right? So the only way you're going to actually be able to embark on this journey is to start at some level where you say, okay, we're going to take this piece,
Yep.
and we're going to move forward there. Because I think if the world is thinking that it's going to come packaged up in some way like software, it's not, right? And I think that's also, there's this misnomer, it's that it's almost that I'm getting software, like, and I'm going to go in and it's going to be A to Z, and I'm just going to be A to Z. It's not that way. And maybe you could just spend a couple minutes on that, because I do think it's important for people to realize that AI is not your typical SaaS type of software.
Yep. Yes, I think there are some very meaningful difference between your traditional software and the way that AI is instantiated in software today. I think, for one, part of the beauty of software is that you can click something and it will do the same thing every time.
Yep.
But of course, the challenge is that as soon as that click doesn't reflect what you want to do, you don't have any avenue to overcome that.
Excel.
And then you go back to Excel.
Yeah.
It's the classic problem.
Yeah.
And so obviously the amazing thing about the emergent abilities of these large models is that they can now reason and think. And so when you have an agent that you're working with, or sophisticated AI that you're working with, it can adapt to the circumstance that you're in. And I think that's a lot of what contributes to the individual benefit that an accountant can feel. They're no longer limited by this very forced set of things that you have to go through all this work to learn it, but then it doesn't actually, in 90% of situations, it doesn't help you. That ability, I think, is really fantastic.
Same.
Now, because of that aspect of it, where if you click the button, you're not going to get the same output every single time, that's where I think the trust piece comes into play.
Yep.
Because, again, I think it's always great to think about it like you're working with a coworker. What would you expect that interaction to be? You just kind of have to transpose that onto the AI in some sense, which is, if you say something to a coworker, they're not going to say the exact same words back to you every time. Mm-hmm. But if you notice that the things they say back to you align with your mental model of what they should be saying and your understanding of the world and things like this, you build up a trust with them that when you ask them something or you share something that you need done, they'll come back to you with something that you might take a quick scan at, but is going to be done right. And so I think you need to impose that kind of frame of thinking on the AI. Now, a lot of the times the experience that people have with the AI is that they say something to it and it comes back with nonsense, or it comes back with something that looks great, but there's, some parts of it that are wrong. And so if you were interacting with a coworker who, sort of acted that way, it would be really difficult to have a great working relationship. And so that, I think, is why the trust aspect is so important with AI. You need to enable people to build that relationship. Otherwise, they'll never get past the like awkward early phases of, working with someone new and working with someone unreliable.
Right.
And they'll never make it a routine part of how they go about things. So good and bad. I mean, on net, I think it's fantastic that this is the way that software is evolving. But it means it does require changing the paradigm. And then for us, obviously, it means we need to invest a ton in making it possible for people to build up that trust, because without that investment, it just won't.
I was going to say
happen.
that too, and I think that's where I want to give the listeners the confidence that with you guys, like you do a great job with that, right? You're not left alone.
Appreciate that.
There is a tremendous amount of support, and on any problem, right? And very quick response, and hey, let's work through this and let's work together. And I do think because of that partnership as well, the relationship that you guys build has also increased trust. And I think that's a real important element in a firm and in an organization that is embarking on this AI journey, is to really think about the partner that they end up with in terms of like who's going to help them with AI, that they have this commitment to really helping their team, and that there's dedicated resources, and that there's this journey together to build the trust. Because if we were left alone, we'd never be anywhere near where we are today. Right?
I appreciate that.
Yeah, and no, it's the truth. And I think and look, we've had some times where it's like, oh no, we've had those oh no moments, and boom, you guys are right there. But that builds trust, right? And so I think that's a real important element here. And I think the other thing is, if we could just level down a little bit on the expectations. I always said this, like I have a very, I think good analogy here, a story to share, where we had a meeting early on, over a year ago, and we were talking about, how's basis doing? And we were talking about like the accuracy rate, and let's say it was around 75%, and that was almost like the conversation was like, we're not there yet. And I asked the question, well, on average, like, what do you think the accuracy rate is of a entry level? Well, I'd say like 60 to 65%. And I said, go faster with basis, right? And so I think where I look at it as like, my God, in any of us, in any organization that is running accounting today, if someone said to you, I can come in and make you 10% better today, who would not do that, right? Because we have not been able to get any movement in terms of really increasing the average of an, let's call it like level of intelligence or accuracy or just value of an accountant over time. But like we now have the ability to jump right into, just if it was 10%. That multiplier is enormous in what it can do to the way in which you're adding value and the way in which you're adding value to their own life. Because again, the better that they feel in terms of their own skill set, the more confident they're going to get, the more they're going to have this reinforcement of like, I enjoy this, because I'm more successful at it.
Yep.
And I think that these types of things that have to be spoken about more.
Yes, I know. I appreciate you saying that, and it goes both ways. I do think that we believe strongly that you need to invest in the firms that are really doing this.
Yeah.
On the one hand, there's like, if you actually believe this is going to change the way that everything gets done, then there's a lot to be figured out.
Yep.
And hopefully this will empower, the firms that are able to really figure this out to do great things.
Right.
But also, if we believe that every business in America needs this, and accounting firms are the partners that are going to make that come to life, they're the trusted advisor that people are going to rely on, then for us, investing in the firms that are going to be leading that is obviously a very sound decision and something we believe strongly in. And so, we have probably accrued a fair amount of knowledge over time about how to go about effectively deploying these in an organization. And I do think we believe it's an important area to invest, just because there's so much that can be done here, both internally and externally. And there's hopefully some things that we can help with in terms of making that possible.
I love that. And one of the things I wanted to touch on as a founder, right, and going through, and for those that are listening out here that are founders or want to be founders, and you go through the process of like having a VC partner. And I know how much effort you guys put into that, and how, like level of intricacies that were involved, and really kind of, hey, who do you end up with? And how has it worked so far? I know, and you guys ended up with Khosla as your lead investor. How has it shaped you? And what could you share with other founders out there that are going through this process, how they would evaluate it, and then how do you see this as an ongoing help for you and Mitch?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. Look, I think having great investors is super important for how the business runs and the potential the business has. We've been extremely fortunate to have a great set of folks involved in the company. I guess when we think about, okay, what are you optimizing for from an investment perspective? I think there are probably a couple things for us that are super important. The first is, and I'll talk specifically about Khosla, but I think Vinod has this saying that 90% or some percent, I can't remember what it is, of investors add negative value. And so I think making sure that you're working with people who have an excellent track record, but who also have a set of prior founders that they've worked with who are willing to vouch for them, and who sort of recognize their role in the company in terms of being able to provide wisdom and be read in on context such that they can provide advice, but also recognizing where there is actually potential for them to be harmful in terms of trying to push the company in certain ways that maybe don't make sense for the particular context of that business.
It's interesting.
So I think that is actually quite meaningful.
Yeah.
The second thing is, when we started thinking about, okay, who do we really want involved in this company? I think with the pace of change from a machine learning perspective, having folks who are on the cutting edge of that and able to share their experiences and learnings and how they sort of see things playing out, given that we are at heart, a machine learning and engineering company, was super important. And so we've been really fortunate to have, Vinod was the first institutional investor in OpenAI. We have 2 board members from OpenAI, Adam D'Angelo and Larry Summers, who are invested and involved in the company. Nat Friedman, who's now the co-lead of part of the superintelligence project at Facebook, at Meta.
That's incredible.
Jeff Dean, who's the chief scientist at DeepMind at Google. all those folks are thinking very deeply about the future of machine learning and the future of how these emergent abilities will materialize. Of course, none of them are thinking about accounting specifically, but being able to translate that in a way that's useful and practical for accounting firms, I think is also a very important part of bringing together the right set of investors. And then finally, if things we're optimizing for, firstly was, okay, make sure you don't have investors who add negative value. Mm-hmm. Second of all, make sure you have the right people in the ML and ML research community involved. And then thirdly, just find folks who can add a lot of wisdom in building hopefully a generational company, and who see a long-term vision and want that to be the outcome. We've been really fortunate to have Keith from Khosla on our board and as a very close partner to me and Mitch, and also Vinod and Adina from Khosla as well. All 3 of them involved in the company.
That's wonderful.
There are a couple of things that they have taught us that I think have meaningfully affected how we go about things. One of my favorite sayings from Keith and Vinod, I think they both use this line. I think Keith took it from Vinod, but is and this is my paraphrasing of it, but the company you build is the team you build, and the team you build is the company you build. Yeah. And I think there's nothing more important than the team. And you see that.
Oh my God, I'm so
here,
lucky.
Amazing set of folks. And that if we want, the AI firm of the future, there's nothing more important than our people. And do they feel like they are getting the proper investment from an AI perspective? And the same thing goes for us. And so, Vinod and Keith are always pushing us to keep the bar for talent and to spend as much of our time as possible on that. And Mitch and I probably together spend almost, 30 to 40% of our collective time on recruiting and spending time with people who might join the company. We probably do the number of interviews and conversations we have per week is ridiculous. And I do think there's nothing more important in the company than that. And so I appreciate the ways in which, Vinod, Keith, Adina have reinforced that for us. And that they share an appreciation for how important that aspect of things is.
Yeah, and I would say too, one of the interesting learnings I've got, because I've learned a lot from you along the way in this journey, and one of the things I also thought was pretty interesting is just how much you've really spent the time in that process, selecting the right people, right, that are coming in, and how important that is, and also on the product, right, making sure that you're building state of the art, AI and machine learning and whatever you're going to be deploying is of the, like, let's say, and I think you said is like build something that's going to be 18 months or 12 to 18 months ahead of anyone else. And, has that been something that you went into with that intent, or was that something that was like an awakening for you, like how important that is? And because you could have gone live and gotten a lot more customers.
Yes.
Right. And we've asked you about that, right? Like, why are you not going out more? Like, you get so many people, and you're like, we're really focused on making sure we have the right people and making sure we build out a wonderful product, which I think is awesome. Because the tendency for many, especially if they're with different investors, is even have the patience around that. They may be looking at like, hey, what is your customer growth? What's your ARR? What is, all of these metrics that are going to become the way in which we're going to judge your success. And you guys have taken a different route.
Yes. No, I think that's I appreciate that. And yes, very much true. I think part of it comes back to this sort of view that we're building for the long term, and we're trying to build something that has generational impact on this industry. And with what's possible now from a machine learning perspective, there's so much work to be done to get there. And so I think we are fully committed to investing any and everything that's required to have a product that can do wonderful things. It does come at the expense of just from a focus perspective of other things. We have no marketing department or team. We don't really do much by way of that category. We we're slow to build out a formal enterprise sales team. All these things. The focus for us has always been first on team, and second on the product, which is a combination of machine learning, a combination of accounting, and a combination of engineering. And we invested in even just ML research things that I don't think pretty much any accounting technology company had invested in at very early days of the company. So I think we strongly believe that. Now, I think we've also been fortunate that we have investors who believe that the long-term thing is the long-term
way
thing.
To go. Sure.
And also, I think we've been fortunate that from a growing enterprise revenue perspective, I think we've done it among up there in terms of the fastest companies to do that, at least according to some metrics. So I think we fortunately have checks and enough boxes there. But the North Star metric in our company is never what is the revenue today.
I love that.
It is always like, how can we build the best possible experience for our customers? And what are the investments that we should be making now to enable that? Many months, many years, sometimes even down the road, and we'll see how that plays out. But I appreciate you highlighting some of the fruits of that labor.
Sure, and I think it goes hand in hand, which you're very authentic, and I think just from that authenticity, it shows the validation there, where you talked about, hey, what's going to be so crucial with your customers, right? CPA firms, accounting firms, trust, right?
Yeah.
And you're demonstrating that, because you're saying we're holding back a little bit, even racing to market, because we want to make sure that we're going to come to you with something that is going to build trust on an immediate level, and how important that is to our own ecosystem. Because again, like, I think for us, and you share this too, the mission is just not just for WIS or for Basin. It's like, how do we change the future of accounting? How do we make it better? How do we improve the lives of accountants, which has been really difficult for many, many years? And how do we make the quality of what we're doing better? And how do we impact businesses at a much greater level than we currently are now? Is more like, we've been more historic in our approach. And, I think we could be so much more value oriented if we can kind of shift and be able to provide better insights and just better, data that we could bring to the client. And I think that's just it's going to feel so good to be able to.
We are here for the long haul.
Yes,
we are
same.
here for a long journey and a great journey. And hopefully we'll be having these conversations still in 20 years.
Absolutely,
or,
that would be
Forward.
wonderful.
We believe strongly in this profession and in what it can help achieve for the broader economy, what we can achieve within the profession, and we want to build those relationships and invest in those relationships today because we hope to have them for many, many years.
Is there anything that you'd want to end on that I didn't ask you that you'd like to close us out with?
It's always a pleasure to work with folks who kind of see where things are going, and none of us know exactly where things are going.
There's a lot of uncertainty.
But we know directionally where it's going. It's a pleasure for us to work with investors who see that long-term orientation and understand what we're building towards and the impact it could have. And it's also a pleasure to work with partners and firms that have that in mind as well. And so, it's been, an amazing journey working closely with yourself and with the team at WIS because I think you all so clearly see that. And that gives us a lot of energy, to keep pushing on all the things we can be doing to take things to the next level. Really very thankful for that. And, seriously looking forward to, several more decades of
awesome.
doing this.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And again, I really appreciate you taking the time. I think we both share right now, like we need to evangelize and get the word out there that, there are much better ways of doing things. And Basis is phenomenal. And really, I think for us, it's really transformed the way we're doing things. And it's not just that we look at this as, hey, we can save, in cost. It's more of it's our output. It's we can bring so much better value to the clients. And to me, that's always been like, that's the direction. How do we continue to improve upon what we do for our clients? So I appreciate everything you guys have done. Thanks again for all the information you've shared today. And I hope our users out there and our listeners find this very useful because I know I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.